Amid China's increasing aggression in the Pacific, concerns are rising over a possible hot war. If that were to happen, where does the U.S. and China currently stand when it comes to naval power? And what about a domain that's not often talked about, the undersea? Joining us to unpack it all is retired U.S. Navy Captain James Fanell, former Director of Intelligence for the U.S. Navy's Pacific Fleet, with nearly 30 years as a naval intelligence officer specializing in Indo-Asia Pacific security affairs. He's also the co-author of Embracing Communist China, America's Greatest Strategic Failure. Captain James Fanell, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the show.
It's great to be with you, Tiffany.
So National Security has a new piece out saying that the U.S. Navy just canceled its new frigate, while China is building 370 ships. So there's a lot of focus on the disparity, if you will, about China's shipbuilding capabilities versus the U.S. You see President Trump doing a lot in terms of trying to revitalize the U.S. shipbuilding industry. But I want to go underwater if we can. There's a recent podcast by the Wall Street Journal with the author Seth Jones, and he was saying that one of China's vulnerabilities is actually underwater. They don't really have those capabilities, especially if you're talking about, say, a Chinese invasion of Taiwan, trying to get troops to Taiwan. What do you make of this? How real of a vulnerability is this for China?
Well, the undersea is the great area of that most folks, when they talk about navies, don't readily come to mind. They think of surface ships, aircraft carriers, and things of that nature. But both the United States and China understand the value and the importance of the undersea domain. And so the United States, obviously, with our nuclear carrier force of fast attack nuclear submarines and ballistic missile nuclear submarines, that's been the staple of the U.S. Navy for, 80 years just about. And that's where we've invested our money. When I joined the Navy and was commissioned in 1986, we were just getting rid of the last vestiges of the diesel boats a couple of years before. So we've been in all nuclear submarine force for 40 years. The Chinese, they made a decision probably 30 years ago inside the PLA and the Central Military Commission on where to expand first. And there were those that argued that they should expand into the aircraft carrier program. But the submarine community won out. And so what we saw starting in the early 2000s was the Chinese going into a production rate of submarines. So the Chinese have been working for a couple of decades to build up their undersea submarine force. It's still not as large as the United States, but it's in terms of concentration of power, it is the largest submarine force in the Western Pacific because our U.S. Navy submarine force is global. So we have half in the Atlantic and operating in the Middle East and in Europe. So they've got more submarines today inside the Western Pacific in diesel and air-independent propulsion, but not in nuclear. But in terms of, the next generation of what's coming, the unmanned undersea vehicles or UUVs, China is now moving into that. So is the United States Navy. The dominance or being able to dominate the undersea environment is critically important in any kind of invasion of Taiwan. And China is kind of at an advantage but a disadvantage when it comes to the Taiwan Strait because it's relatively shallow. It's not deep water. Deep water allows for more robust acoustic detection from undersea vehicles. In a shallower water with high salinity, lots of salt, like the Taiwan Strait, it makes acoustic detections more difficult. But that doesn't mean China's not working on it. And we have documentation from the Chinese going back a decade talking about their undersea Great Wall and being able to put down sensors and arrays that would be able to detect foreign undersea vehicles that would come in, presumably the U.S. Navy. And that's like 10 years ago. So they've been working on that for 10 years. They're not where the United States is. They're probably approaching where the Russians are in some areas in terms of quieting and development of acoustic detection capabilities. There's been reports, and we've seen oceanographic research ships operating outside the first island chain in that deep water of the Philippine Sea between Okinawa and Guam. And so there's probabilities that China's been operating there, maybe laying down their own arrays to be able to have hydroacoustic capability to detect U.S. Navy and other nations' submarines. Like other areas where the PLA Navy has made great leaps, like in their carrier program. They skipped a whole generation. They went from ski jump ramps to electromagnetic aircraft launch catapults. They skipped steam altogether, which the U.S. Navy has done for 80 years about. So they skipped that and skipped the generation, skipped echelon technology. So they're probably working towards and trying to do the same in the undersea domain, whether it's through espionage, open source intelligence activities, or just their own developments. And America's plan, if you will, if there was to be a fight, would be to use our advantage in the undersea domain with our fast attack submarines with TLAMs and other weapon systems to be able to inflict great damage on a Taiwan invasion force from the PLA, a PLA amphibious landing in Taiwan. We'd want to use our submarines to impact there. But again, Taiwan Strait's shallow. Operating nuclear submarines in the shallow waters of the Taiwan Strait becomes much harder. So one of the things that I think that Admiral Paparo and the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command are working on is that they talked about this hellscape and these replicator programs for drones and autonomous vehicles. Part of that will be the ability for the U.S. and Taiwan to lay and seed mines with unmanned vehicles in the Taiwan Strait that would, cause great harm to an invasion fleet if you have mines floating in the Taiwan Strait. And we should, in my opinion, keep striving to stay ahead of them and be able to counter whatever they're throwing into the undersea domain.
Captain James Fanell, as always, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Tiffany.